Here I am at my mother's place, Rappahannock County, Virginia, where I've been living on and off for a while, caring for her. It's a beautiful spot near Shenandoah. I don't know if this will be a beautiful video, though. I'm liable to sound kind of irritated. But I wanted to recapitulate some of my arguments against some of the arguments for the legitimacy of the political state in response to having started reading this book, The State by Phillip Pettit. I liked one of Pettit's previous books, Republicanism, a fair amount, actually. Possibly because he didn't seem that enthused for domination. I think domination is liable to be the result of taking his arguments too seriously this time around, though. It's the first third of the book, let's say, though I don't think it is quite completely straight about this, is extremely derivative. All right, I guess I don't know of social contract theory a la Hobbes and Locke, but also Hume's criticism of those, moving on toward rational choice theory and game theory in the 20th century, where people like James Buchanan purported that they could prove mathematically that a state would rationally emerge in almost any human situation, I guess you'd say. Or a state would emerge justifiably or inevitably even, given certain basic assumptions. The basic assumptions being homo economicus. That is, that we have we start with basically equal and basically self-interested agents. I mean, that is actually Hobbes' starting point. It's actually Locke's starting point. It's actually Kant's starting point. It's Buchanan's starting point, and it's Pettit's starting point. None of them are concerned with the fact that that's total fiction, I guess. For very good reasons, it can't be like that. On the other hand, the idea in Rawls and in Pettit probably is imagining these scenarios, and in Rousseau, and in Locke, and actually in Hobbes too. Imagining these scenarios can help us justify the existence of the political state, our 400-year project. Dozens of arguments. And Bubba, you gonna need them, aren't you? If there's such a thing as protesting too much, the state protests too much and butters your bread too. All right, so, the Prussian state, let's say. You could spend a lot of time justifying its existence, I think, and not getting fired. But at any rate, let's try this rational choice style, which really does extend to that 400-year history of liberal political thought or whatever, okay? I think it's a complete non-starter. I can't believe that Pettit, who actually I corresponded with a little bit and who talked about my book Against the State a little bit, not in here though, I can't believe that Pettit would just put it forward again in this very baldly Buchanan form or whatever, all right? With a dozen, 24 assumptions, idealizing assumptions that vitiate any application to the real world, but even if they didn't, this argument doesn't work at all, okay? And provably, this style of argument is the worst thing I've ever seen, all right? So let me just refute it real quick, and this is going to go for Rawls too. Here it is. I mean, here's the conclusion. Rational agents. Let's try this. I'm going to give you the whole picture, the whole liberal tradition. I'm going to give you your picture. They're basically rational agents, which means self-interested economic agents. I mean, that's not what I would mean by rationality, but that's what y'all mean. That's okay. All right. They're basically in a situation of equality. Whatever that means to whatever degree we need for idealizing your idealizing situation. Such people in the original position, let's say, okay? Or in a Pettit fictional genealogy. Pettit uses the term genealogy to designate the myth that he tells. I don't know why he uses genealogy. It has Nietzschean overtones, as he acknowledges. This has nothing to do with Nietzschean genealogy. It's just the opposite. It's just a myth of the state thing, okay? And the idea that this can justify a real state is, the whole thing breaks down right there. But if it didn't, it would break down in the first third with this hyper-familiar argument for the rationality of the state. Yeah, so here's my assertion. Here's my assertion. People in the original position, for example, could not rationally choose to constitute a state. People in a Pettit genealogical scenario couldn't choose to constitute a state. And so, of course, these things have no power to justify the existence of the state. In fact, your argument, your style of argument, runs exactly the opposite. I can prove that rational, equal, self-interested agents could never rationally choose a state. And nothing could be more obvious, man. So I'm really wondering about this. Buchanan and Pettit, too. All right, so here's the idea, and it's going to be really familiar, I think. Imagine independent, self-interested agents living on an island somewhere. 5, let's call it, say 10 of them, okay? Each one living in a tree. This is so far from anything that's possible for human beings, but that doesn't matter, I guess, okay? All right, so each one living in a tree, and each one trying to maximize their own resources because they're these fictional entities invented by, supposedly Adam Smith or something. All right, or they're Hobbesian or, whatever. Now, they're each self-interested, so, they'll each hunt and gather as much as resources as they can, but they'll also each take as much of the other people's resources as they can, because they're self-interested. So as soon as they see that I can grab that guy's food, they will. That's just what they are. It's not what we are necessarily, but it's what they are, okay? Because they're rational? All right, but anyway, they'll grab, so, okay. In that situation, everyone's grabbing everybody's stuff, and everyone is expending resources defending their stuff. They reach what Buchanan calls, for example, Pettit is running all of this, really, an anarchist equilibrium. That is, let's stipulate that people drop out if they can't if they can't be part of this equilibrium. If they can't defend their stuff from the others, they die, or whatever, okay. But we end up with an anarchist equilibrium where people spend a lot of their time defending and securing their stuff from the others, and, some time going out and securing resources as well. But each tree is fortified, and you're really careful about when you go out to gather resources and everything, because someone is going to come take your stuff. So, we might say that half of this is all speculative economically or whatever, but let's say that half of their resources and time is expended in trying to secure themselves from each other. Right? Now, obviously, they could do much, much better. And in fact, this might make the difference between survival and not, if they were reached an agreement not to take each other's stuff. Right? So then they each increase their ability to get resources by 50%. Obviously, that is the rational outcome. Each person in that scenario has a rational motivation, rationality being maximum economic self-interest or maximum utilities. Each person in that scenario has a comprehensible rational motivation to enter into an agreement not to take other people's stuff. I'm running the Buchanan game theoretic style of, Humean justification or utilitarian argument for the justification of the state. Or social contract really does the same thing. And just make the contract fictional. The motivations are the same. you're insecure. You're undergoing too many expenses in order to secure yourself, or you're not able to at all. Right? Okay, so now we're in a happy apparent situation where all 10 of us, each of us in our tree, happy to go out hunting and gathering all day, bring it back, cook it. You know, I don't know if we do any collective festivities because we're homo economicus, so we don't do nothing except maximize our resources. And, you know, okay. But now someone realizes that if everyone else continues to abide by the agreement and I violate it, I take, you know, Jimmy's stuff or whatever, and Jimmy continues to not take my stuff, everyone else continues by the agreement, this will be to my advantage. So everyone will try to be a free rider. Actually, again, we're just stipulating that we know their motivations to maximize their resources in every condition, okay, moment by moment. But, okay, so Jimmy, person 8 or whatever, has a motivation to be a free rider. That is, to violate the agreement as long as the other people continue to observe it, okay? So he will, because he's a utility maximizing agent, rational agent. All right, but unfortunately everyone has this motivation equally. So different scenarios might emerge, you know, like, you know, we got 3 free riders and 7 people paying all their expenses, right? While they raid other people's stuff and everything. So that's not going to last very long, right? Because everyone else is going to say, like, well, so first of all, everyone has exact motivation to do the same, although it reduces with each free rider because the social cooperation, the reward of social cooperation reduces with each free rider. At any rate, the agreement will break down. So it will be rational to fund, let's say, or appoint a enforcement mechanism. So we're going to be saving 50% of our resources. Again, this is just, you know, academic spitballing or whatever, in the agreement. Okay, but then the agreement, if not enforced, breaks down immediately, breaks down over and over again. So what if we invested 25% of our resources in a mechanism, a group of people, and a set of principles, let's say, that they will enforce, to, well, that's in the agreement, or the practices or the norms that are emerging. See, Pettit doesn't really put this in terms of agreements. It's norms that emerge, but the whole same structure emerges. Like, okay, a norm emerges, not that we explicitly agree. So in the 10-person scenario in a Pettit thing, he's saying he's trying to distinguish his position from social contract theory. Yes and no. All right. But okay, so a norm of cooperation emerges, even if not an explicit sign on the dotted line agreement. And it would. I mean, an explicit sign on the dotted line agreement might emerge, but a norm might emerge that we cooperate here. It's for all of our benefit, okay? So it's not necessarily an agreement. What we'll realize is that, okay, so if we're expending 50% of our resources defending ourselves in a state of nature or in the anarchist equilibrium, pre-state condition, let's take half of that and create an enforcement mechanism for our norms or our laws. I mean, for Pettit, actually, the laws could exist without the enforcement mechanisms. That means like just a widely held norm that people say think should be or could be enforced is a law. But then the enforcement mechanism, the actual police force for the law, is a further matter. That's when the state emerges. So we're going to need to create an enforcement mechanism, and this is going to be, although various people are a little bit obscure about this, as well they must be, a certain group of people that's heavily armed and operates a monopoly of coercion. I mean, that's not, Pettit isn't obscure about that. He goes right at it, right? That's where we're going. Of course that's where we're going. There's no place else we could have ended up. In the whole history of political philosophy, essentially, right? By any routes necessary, no matter how ridiculous. will end up with the state, I'll tell you that. All right, you're going to end up imprisoned. Inevitably. Okay, so we will constitute a state that is a body of people that operates a monopoly of coercion as an enforcement mechanism for our agreement. And we authorize them, and they have to be effectively irresistible. They have to be able to arrest anybody. They have to be able to enforce the agreement against anybody. That means that they have to have the greatest coercive force or the greatest force of violence available at that point in history, let's say in that place. So this is the inevitable rational march. Now, the fact that the people are fictional, there's never been people like that. The fact that the scenarios are totally, wildly implausible, fictional. Pettit doesn't seem concerned about that. In fact, he seems to argue this straight up. If a plausible fictional scenario can be given, then that's the actual truth. It's amazing. But okay, so all right, look. All right, so that's really true though. Okay, let's say we've effectively enforced our norms. And we've done that by expending 25% of our resources, as opposed to the 50% that we had to expend just to defend ourselves. Obviously, we will do that because we're rational, self-interested agents. Yes. No. No, we won't. No, we won't. Not if we're rational and self-interested, for God's sakes, okay? Not even close. What we're doing, the 10 of us, when we say, like, okay, those two, Bobby and Jimmy, are our enforcement mechanisms, they'll have all the machetes. Okay? And we authorize them to enforce our agreements. And we'll give up our machetes right now in a big pile. Bobby and Jimmy can have them. What we've done is created a force that's completely irresistible, that can disempower us at any time, that can dispossess us completely on a whim, execute us and our families and our ethnic group, etc. Okay? You saved 25%, but you took a magnificent risk. A risk that is available every minute for the rest of your history. That this force will turn on you and annihilate you, and you have no recourse, right? You've given them a monopoly on violence by definition, right? If you could restrict that force to the prescribed functions, you would have a good argument, but you can't, so you doubt. Maybe you think this is where the fictional scenario ends and the actuality hits your argument, okay? That is, governments turn on their people all the time and oppress them. Governments enforce the economic and social hierarchies and racial hierarchies that the society displays anyway and exacerbates them, okay? And you're creating a situation where you want a total hierarchy of power. That is, some people to have very little or none, maybe the vote, and some people to have a lot of it, that is straight access to police enforcement. And you say that so if I'm in the original position of Rawls, I don't know where I'm going to end up. That's the whole point. What if I end up at the bottom of the power hierarchy that is stripped of power entirely because Rawls constitutes a state? You're proposing to create a state, and I'm in the original position. What if I end up at the bottom of the political power hierarchy? No, you can't constitute a state. I could never make that choice rationally. That is to will my own doom. Right? I don't know how you can make this argument. I don't see why you keep making this argument. Don't you see that this argument is not going to work whatsoever? And that if you put this whole question on what rational and relatively equal people would choose outside of a state, I propose to prove that they couldn't choose a state. Nor is this a completely fictional scenario. We should think about anarchist anthropology, Pierre Clostrus, for example, but also Graeber and James Scott. They argue that, for example, all around the Inca Empire, there was a shatter zone, and all over the world, of people that withdrew or escaped from that state for extremely comprehensible reasons, because there was a total political hierarchy in those states. So you could be conscripted, used as slave labor, all right, etc. Taxed to starvation. Right? There are definitely reasons you might want to leave the empire, because it's a power hierarchy and you got nothing, all right? So all around, all the empires, all around the world, being a little simplistic about it, there emerged people, tribal cultures, that had extremely well-developed procedures for keeping state-like concentrations of power from emerging among them. Why did they do that? Because any rational person would, I assert. So, I don't know if Phillip Pettit would be worried about this. Want to watch this? Probably not. But I think you better, man, because this shit ain't working at all, man. Or show me why it does, or how you can answer that kind of shit. I don't think so. Peace, statists. Peace, oppressors. What do you want?